The Nintendo Switch 2 has sold over 6 million copies in 7 weeks, and obviously the success of the Switch 2 have even made Bandai Namco go, hey, we should put Dragon Ball Sparking Zero on this. And now that we're talking about that, Dragon Ball games on Nintendo consoles. Do you guys remember the good old days where we used to get Dragon Ball games on Nintendo consoles? Not just ports, I mean fully made Dragon Ball games for the Nintendo console. We used to get games like Dragon Ball Fusions, we got games like Dragon Ball Extreme Budoten, we got games like we even got Super Dragon Ball Heroes after a while. But now that I'm talking about those kind of games, I want to mention, why do we not have re-releases for them? Dragon Ball Fusions, I'm not saying deserves a sequel or anything, but it could have a re-release involving some of the more modern characters. Jiren, Beast Gohan, Gogeta, DBS Broly. Hell, they could even include some manga characters as what-if specials. And Dragon Ball, Super Dragon Ball Heroes especially, has so much extra content, they could easily make the rest of the game as a new Nintendo Switch 2 exclusive. So why hasn't Bandai Namco actually just done that yet? Hello everyone, it's me again, Steve OJ here, back to more Dragon Ball news in general, and I wanted to talk about Dragon Ball games and their exclusivity on the Switch. Now, I'm not saying that they should make Dragon Ball games exclusive to the Switch. I'm pretty sure Bandai Namco probably doesn't do that anymore, and I'm going to get this out of the way really quick. I'm very sure Bandai Namco doesn't do that anymore because they probably don't make as much money as when you just release them on everything, which is why Xenoverse, Fighters, and yes, even you Sparking Zero are so successful. Hell, might even be a reason why Breakers is so successful, right? So I'm very curious about the exclusivity when it comes to Dragon Ball games on the Switch, because I'm not saying that you have to only make them for the Switch, but the Dragon Ball games that were made for the Nintendo consoles, like Fusions and Super Dragon Ball Heroes, World Mission, by the way, we don't even have the rest of Super Dragon Ball Heroes. I think the part that it stops at is when Ultra Instinct Goku like beats up Kamba, maybe, or something adjacent to that. It's not even covering the rest of Super Dragon Ball Heroes, which has insane stuff, like, you know, the Giant Supreme Kai of Time, which would probably make them add that as DLC to Xenoverse 2, Universe Tree Goku, Limit Breaker SSJ4, all of this other insane stuff. But I don't want to get into all of those yet. I want to talk about the main thing, which is just Dragon Ball games on Nintendo consoles, and then we'll talk about all the benefits and the negatives that could be received with, you know, those actually happening. And of how many copies have sold of the Switch 2, it is quite the shock that we are getting, obviously, games like Dragon Ball Sparking Zero, again, for the Switch 2. We already had Xenoverse 2 and Fighters for the Nintendo Switch 1. But it seems like they are completely willing to port Dragon Ball games over for the for the extra sales they can pull on such a big console that obviously has tons of players buying it. Like, the sales for Switch 2, I think, are the highest console sales have ever been in the shortest span of time. Obviously, every time Nintendo releases a console, I feel like they break this record because, you know, Nintendo has a really good way of keeping up, I guess, brand loyalty when it comes to the, you know, from the companies to the customer. And obviously every other system or every other developer sees that because they always do their best to port their games to Switch. Hell, even Elden Ring is getting ported to Switch, a game that pretty much like most people, I think, have played if they play video games, because it's just one of those games where it's like, it gets highly rated, it's on everything already. Why not have it on the Switch 2 as well, right? So that's pretty cool. But what I wanted to talk about is that they don't have to just do Xenoverse, Fighters, Sparking Zero, and I think Kakarot when it comes to putting new games over. They can actually still put their old games there. Again, I want to remind you that the Nintendo Switch consoles do actually allow you to play older games again. You can play games like, you know, the older Metroid games, you can play the older Mario games, all the Zelda games, and it doesn't just stop there. Games like Dragon Ball Fusions, again, that have been around for a very long time, that you can't play again because of the system that they're on, could easily get a re-release on the Switch, and I think they could make it work too. And it doesn't just stop at Fusions, obviously. I would obviously like if Dragon Ball Heroes could have the same thing, because that game literally had a Switch release for global. That was like back in 2019, and Dragon Ball Fusions was, I think Dragon Ball Fusions was the same year as Xenoverse 2. So the same year Dragon Ball Fusions came out, the same year Xenoverse 2 came out. Obviously, one game was substantially more popular than the other, but it doesn't change the fact that Dragon Ball Fusions is a thing I think many people would just like to enjoy. Not to mention, again, I do think that the art style and the general appeal of the game could still get a younger audience into Dragon Ball. I'm not saying a younger audience would have a hard time getting into Dragon Ball, but like I explained earlier with the Elden Ring section and, you know, the player count on the Switch games, there's nothing wrong with just pulling in more people if you can, especially from your very successful, you know, console. Now, obviously, the main issue with doing a Dragon Ball Fusions re-release, or a rerun, I guess, for the Switch 2, is that you'd have to add more stuff to it. I get that you could probably just port over Dragon Ball Fusions and, you know, just change some of the 3DS systems to work better with a non-3DS system. But I think to make it really work, you'd have to do like a second edition of Dragon Ball Fusions. I'm not saying you have to make Dragon Ball Fusions 2, but with all the new stuff we have now, you'd have to, because I think Dragon Ball Fusions goes up to the Goku Black arc, right? Dragon Ball Fusions came out the same year as Xenoverse 2, so that means the Goku Black arc ended when Dragon Ball Fusions came out. But to my knowledge, I think the latest characters that appear in Dragon Ball Fusions are like Fuse Zamasu and Vegito Blue. I think DBS Broly also got into the game as well, and maybe Blue Gogeta, but like not like Jiren or like UI Goku or anything. And especially nothing like, Beast Gohan, because that was even further after Dragon Ball Fusions. Actually, if DBS Broly was in the game, I would have remembered the Broly with a chest scar or like whited out eyes, because he also does that. I think Karoli Black is made of Z Broly and Goku Black, so no, I was completely wrong about that. But yeah, it's if they did make a Dragon Ball Fusion, they would have to incorporate some of the newer stuff. Again, I'm pretty sure people would love to see insane fusions like full power Jiren fusing with like God of Destruction Topo, or maybe they'll do Beerus and Topo fusion. You know how Dragon Ball, and you know what, Dokkan benefits from all of this, because Dokkan will just add these as collab units, and they'll probably give them like, I don't know, either really niche passives or make them insanely busted for like no reason. Dragon Ball can easily make more money from doing stuff that doesn't even like Dragon Ball's the type of company that they can actually make money off of an idea. And you would say, well, that's stupid. Obviously, every idea gets turned into a product that you can sell. Yes, that's the point. What I mean is that Dragon Ball can easily make something that like flops, for lack of a better word, or doesn't get as much attention, but then they can resell it in Dokkan and it would make infinite money. They can resell it in Legends and it would make infinite money. They could sell it as a keychain and it'll make more money. They could sell it as an SH figure art and it'll make more money. You know, Dragon Ball can make money off of really any single venture they ever have, which is why people are so bothered by Dragon Ball doing the bare minimum, because it's like they're so lazy they don't even want to make money. Like other like super big companies or greedy companies, they'll do the most they can to make money off of every small thing. For the most part, do they even know what they're doing in general? You know, the most virtuous people ever, and they care about their customers' wallets. It's because... Oh, again, you guys just let me know, what fusions would you like to see if we ever did get another Dragon Ball Fusions game? Not about Dragon Ball Fusions in general, but if there was ever another Dragon Ball game that focused on fusions. What fusions would you like to see, since we have all these characters on it? I'm pretty sure a lot of people are probably going to say Beast Gohan Ultra Instinct, because let's be real, that's an untapped market. And now we're going to talk about Dragon Ball Heroes, because Dragon Ball Heroes on the Switch, I'm not going to lie, I don't know how else to describe it. I think Dragon Ball Heroes on the Switch genuinely might have just got like cucked. It's pretty tragic, because one of the biggest issues I think a lot of people had with Super Dragon Ball Heroes is kind of just its really slow opening. Now, I get why it's like that, because when the game originally released, like, what, 8 years before that point? When the game originally released 8 years before that point, there was no Dragon Ball Super anime, there was none of that stuff. It was just, Dragon Ball was just an open vacuum where you could do anything, right? That's back in the day where they were putting Super Saiyan 3 Vegeta in video games, Super Saiyan 3 Broly in video games. They were doing anything, they were making new villains. Now Dragon Ball just repeats the same characters we get from DBS over and over and over again. Even Dokkan does this. But yeah, that was back in the day where nothing was going on. You know, you could have a really long opening for your Dragon Ball game, because you know, it's a new big Dragon Ball game. Also, it's a Dragon Ball game that has a very, very impressive roster, a ginormous roster even. And it only got bigger when DBS came out and added even more characters to it, like you know, Caulifla, Kale, Hits, Jiren, Broly, Zeno. I'm pretty sure Chilai is even playable in that game as well. So yeah, Dragon Ball Heroes, it does have a lot of playable character stuff, but honestly, the mix of the graphics, because again, I don't have an issue with the graphics, but the graphics obviously is a very big appeasing factor to most normie audiences, right? If something just looks good or looks pretty, that's all it takes, even if it's not the most satisfying thing. But Dragon Ball Heroes didn't look the prettiest, so people really just skipped on it. And not to mention, I'm very, very sure Kakarot released 1 year after that game. We were waiting for a game called Dragon Ball Project Z, which looked amazing. So most people were only seeing Dragon Ball Super Heroes or Super Dragon Ball Heroes as like a filler thing before they get Dragon Ball Z Kakarot. So a lot of people didn't really give the game a good shot. But honestly, I think if it had a re-release, especially with some of the more modern Super Dragon Ball Heroes stuff, not just from World Mission, but from like all the other like silly arcs as well, like Universe Tree Goku, the Limit Break SSJ4s, give us all of the other like modern stuff that Super Dragon Ball Heroes. Now that the anime is completely finished for Super Dragon Ball Heroes and Dragon Ball Super Divers is taken over and we're never getting Super Dragon Ball Heroes again, I think this is a pretty good shot to just add everything to Super Dragon Ball Heroes. So I think a Nintendo Switch 2 re-release, where they actually just add the rest of the game. You know, Ultra Instinct for custom characters, Android Species, or not Android Species, but Android Race for custom characters. You know, God of Destruction, Race. I'm pretty sure God of Destruction, was it a race or transformation? But either way, Dragon Ball Heroes has a lot in it, and I would think that it would benefit greatly from having a re-release on the Switch 2, since it was a Switch 1 game, and now we can get the rest of it as a Switch 2 game. I think that would definitely make people happy, especially because of the newer models that are in the, you know, basically the later portions of Super Dragon Ball Heroes, the unique villains, the newer models. People right now will have an appreciation for Dragon Ball stuff that isn't just, here's the DBZ story again, and here's a 1v1 fighter game where you fight an enemy and shoot Kamehamehas. Like, people actually do want more in their Dragon Ball games, especially with how Sparking Zero performed. But I think this is honestly a good place to end the video. I think the Dragon Ball games will actually benefit from the Nintendo exclusivity, but I do believe that they do try to bank on as many people buying the games as possible, which might be the main reason why they stopped, because it is weird how we don't have the rest of Super Dragon Ball Heroes by now. And Dragon Ball Fusions is a very easy to tap into market, but again, they're probably not big fans of Nintendo exclusivity. They want to make as much money as possible by putting on every system, not just one. So you guys let me know what you think. But I think this is a good place to end it. I do hope you all enjoyed, and if you did, please leave a like, don't forget to subscribe, it's a great way to support the channel, and leave a comment down below as to what you'd like to see next, fellas. I do love you all. I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you all next time. Take care and peace.